Most of you aren't subscribed. Make sure to subscribe, as it helps out the channel. Without further ado, the series kicks off within the Police Department Division 1, where Supervisor Amamiya is furious at the fact that there has been a fifth victim with no new clues on the perpetrator. Turning to our MC Ashiki, Amamiya orders Ashiki to head home for the night, declaring that Ashiki being sleep-deprived will only slow down their investigations. Having a chat with Kiku, Ashiki fears that if he doesn't produce results soon, he'll get kicked out of the first division. Kiku reflects on how Ashiki was fooled by a criminal and allowed them to escape 3 times, and on top of that Ashiki was once arrested for sneaking around at night. But Kiku praises Ashiki for pursuing justice, even though his methods aren't conventional. Ashiki says the recent murders have been stuck on his mind, something Kiku takes note of, as he uses the opportunity to allude to someone that can catch the current culprit at hand. Curious, Ashiki demands to know who this mysterious person is, but Kiku reveals that this genius detective is no ordinary man. Having been given the address along with a picture of the genius detective, Kiku suggests that Ashiki visit him, leading Ashiki to an old apartment building in search of this detective. Entering the building, Ashiki wonders why the detective isn't working for the police full-time. But as Ashiki stumbles upon the detective's apartment building, Ashiki is told to go away as he tries to ring the doorbell. Believing that he must have heard wrong, Ashiki tries again, but once again is told to go away. Ashiki believes that he's being mistaken for someone else, but the detective orders Ashiki to go beg the gods for help in saving his job, surprising Ashiki as to how the detective knew he visited the shrine. When Ashiki tries to introduce himself as a fellow member of the police department, Ashiki gets ignored, but upon mentioning how Kiku was the one who told Ashiki to seek the detective's advice, the detective reluctantly opens the door, revealing his disheveled look. Ashiki is in complete shock, wondering if this is the same Kamonohashi Ran as the slick-back gentleman in the photos, frightened to see Kamo's dead eyes and unkempt hair. Having been insulted enough, Kamo retreats back into his apartment, prompting Ashiki to follow after, asking how Kamo knows Kiku but almost steps on Kamo's cat. Kamo reveals that he was friends with Kiku's son, grateful that Kiku took care of him when he was young. As for the cat, Kiku sent it to Kamo fearing that Kamo would be alone. Kamo suddenly collapses to the ground, but Ashiki realizes that the ground has been padded, the windows are completely shut, also learning that Kamo has no internet connection, completely cutting himself off from the outside world. Seeing Kamo's list of how depressing his life has become, Ashiki tries to ask Kamo something, but Kamo simply refuses, stating that he knows Kiku has sent Ashiki to be his partner, but sadly reveals that Ashiki isn't the first person Kiku has sent, as Kamo has rejected and humbled everyone Kiku has sent. When Ashiki hears that Kamo has retired from being a detective, Ashiki asks for Kamo's advice on a recent murder case, but out of nowhere Kamo begins screaming, annoying Ashiki, as Kamo says he doesn't want to hear about any murders. Seeing as there is nothing that can be done, Ashiki turns to leave, but gets curious as to how Kamo knew he visited a shrine recently to beg gods for help. Kamo states that he noticed some pine pollen on Ashiki's shoulder, something that can be found around a nearby shrine. Coupled that with a can of coffee in Ashiki's left pocket and some spare change in his right, Kamo deduced that Ashiki had visited the Wakana shrine bright and early. Amazed that Kamo was spot on, Kamo gets annoyed that Ashiki is still here. Kamo adds that he can tell his grandparents raised Ashiki due to Ashiki's attitude. Smirking, Kamo states that he knows Ashiki is here seeking Kamo's help to avoid being kicked from Division 1, but is curious as to why Kiku would send someone like Ashiki that is reliant on others, someone that Kamo is well known to hate. Ashiki believes that Kamo will be able to solve the most recent murder, but when Kamo refuses, Ashiki begins screaming out the details of the recent murders, annoyed to see Kamo has put in earplugs to block out Ashiki's words. Trying to persuade Kamo, Ashiki suddenly gets a call from Amamiya, but gets his phone knocked away by Kamo, ordering Ashiki to not talk about work in his presence. Sadly, Ashiki had answered the phone, hearing Amamiya report that a sixth body had been found in Kazuhana Park in Shibuya, ordering Ashiki to head there since he's the closest. Before Ashiki can leave, he spots Kamo writhing in pain, uttering that he can't hold himself back any longer. Ashiki learns that Kamo can't resist solving a case once he learns of the details, having been forced to retire from being a detective, something Ashiki believes is due to Kamo's weak body. Kamo orders Ashiki to leave, as Kamo plans to knock himself out with some sleeping pills, but Ashiki is very persistent on Kamo solving the case, reminding Kamo that human lives are at stake. Intrigued by Ashiki's genuine passion, Kamo agrees to visit the crime scene, but warns Ashiki to never allow himself to leave Ashiki's sight. As both men jog to the scene of the crime, Ashiki is amazed at Kamo's athleticism, shocked to hear Kamo trains 4 hours a day in his home gym. As Ashiki and Kamo are taken to the victim's body, they learn that the victim is a private investment broker, Okamasa. Apparently Okamasa didn't end up going to a scheduled party last night, but as a police officer recounts some more details, Kamo suddenly lays down next to the victim's corpse. Kamo begins uttering that the victim had drowned, scolding the corpse for handing over their valuable goods without a fight, but this makes the police officer wonder how Kamo knows all of this without hearing about the other corpses. Kamo states that the white froth from the victim's mouth indicates possibility of drowning, and since his suit is still intact, Kamo deduces that his watch along with his wallet must have been stolen as well. Hearing all of this, Ashiki states that the other victims had similar deaths, all having their bodies intact, with no signs of poisoning. Only their valuable goods were stolen and their bodies seemed to have drowned. Kamo asks for more details on the victims, only to be handed a tablet of all the victims and where they were heading before their deaths. Seeing no overlap between victims, Ashiki wonders if there was a location to drown the victims, giving Kamo an idea of who the perpetrator is and where they can be. Leaping onto his legs, Kamo declares they'll be heading out, but first asks Ashiki for some spare cash. With Kamo disguising Ashiki in a fancy-looking outfit, they have to change Ashiki's hair at a nearby hair salon, but Ashiki notes how he's sleep-deprived, so he'll probably fall asleep. As Ashiki heads inside to meet with the barber, Kamo lays outside, weirding out some kids. With Ashiki and the barber having some small chit-chat, the barber asks for Ashiki to place his hair into the basin to be shampooed. As the barber heads off to retrieve some towels, the barber prepares to take out another item, but suddenly realizes that Ashiki has fallen asleep, smirking as he turns on the sink to drown Ashiki. Out of nowhere, Kamo appears, revealed to have picked the door's lock, declaring that the killer is the barber, but at the same time Ashiki lifts his head, having followed Kamo's instruction to hold his breath. Kamo reveals that the victims exhibited no signs of passing due to drugs or violence since the barber has specially crafted a basin that poured out oxygen-deficient air, something when coupled with water would immediately cause the victims to faint only to then drown. Kamo reveals that all the victims had messy hair, therefore the murderer only targeted people that were looking for a haircut, and by narrowing down the shops to ones that accept walk-ins and a place not known to many. Kamo states that the barber targeted only the rich, hence why Ashiki had to change his outfit, but when Kamo reveals they are detectives, the barber knocks down some shelves, fleeing. As the two chase after Barber, Kamo reveals that he had locked down the barber's escape route, demanding to know the barber's motive behind killing 6 people. When the barber declares that he hates the rich and doesn't regret his actions, Kamo suddenly orders the barber to jump to his death, weird as Kamo's eyes are suddenly glowing. With the barber now sharing those glowing eyes, the barber mindlessly follows Kamo's orders, all whilst Ashiki rushes to stop the barber. As Kamo snaps out of it, he scolds himself for letting his curse take effect once more, but surprisingly, Ashiki had managed to catch the barber before he jumped, buying Kamo enough time to save them both with a makeshift bungee rope. As the other detectives arrive, Kamo fills Ashiki in on his curse that causes him to slay the murder culprit, revealing that Kamo has a 100% success rate on solving cases, but his capture rate is 0. Realizing why Kiku sent Ashiki, Kamo declares that Ashiki's ability to protect others will overcome Kamo's fatal flaw, declaring that they'll work together moving forward. Flashing back, we see several people gathered around a young Kamo, completely amazed that Kamo was able to solve a cold case. Given the title of the smartest student in his school, Kamo's peers and teachers have high hopes for Kamo's future, a future where Kamo plans to become a detective. With a new day arriving, Ashiki visits Kamo's apartment, frightened when Kamo suddenly opens the door, excited to see Ashiki. Ashiki apologizes as he hasn't been assigned a case, disappointing as Kamo returns into his apartment, laying on the ground. Ashiki notices Kamo mumbling, annoyed that Kamo is blaming him for wasting his talent. But Ashiki gets curious upon learning Kamo used to attend Blue Academy, the world's most elite detective training academy. The academy also produced all the best detectives known to date, but although Kamo ranked higher than them all, during a practical exam, Kamo had wounded up slaughtering all the attendees, leading to Kamo being expelled and forbidden from obtaining his detective license. Ashiki wonders what's so important about a detective license, but Kamo reveals that the license gives detectives access to the world's toughest mysteries, but sadly Kamo will be executed by Blue if he even tries looking into any cases. Suddenly realizing that Kamo technically looked in the barber case with him, Ashiki fears what is going to happen to Kamo, but Kamo states that he'll have to lay low from here on out. Kamo reassures Ashiki that they'll still solve cases together, but Ashiki will have to do the digging whilst Kamo guides him. Ashiki refuses to be Kamo's puppet, but Kamo ignores Ashiki's cries, stating that he'll disguise himself when showing up to crime scenes, as Kamo needs to see and pay respect to the victims. When Ashiki tries to back out, Kamo simply scolds Ashiki for not bringing any cases to him, but Ashiki reveals that his boss, Amamiya, decides what he works on. When Kamo is curious as to who Amamiya is, Ashiki shows Kamo a picture of her, prompting Kamo to compliment Amamiya's looks, but also deduces that someone must have taken the photo for Ashiki. Ashiki admits that it was a coworker that fancied Amamiya, but as for himself, he personally is quite scared of her, something Kamo has noticed as well. Apparently this morning, Division 1 had received a report of a male corpse in his 20s with a head injury, but upon seeing a picture of the body, Amamiya went to check the scene of the crime, leaving Ashiki with his tasks to complete. Kamo praises Ashiki for receiving a task only he can solve, but Ashiki reveals that he's only ever assigned easy and boring tasks, with the most recent one being a report of missing money from a piggy bank. Ashiki apologizes for such a boring task, but Kamo states that he'll make everyone respect Ashiki, springing to his feet, donning a disguise, only to declare that no case shall go unsolved. As the two leave, Ashiki almost steps on the cat again, only to visit and introduce themselves to the girl that had reported the crime. Upon entering the women's house, Kamo strangely begins tinkering with a suitcase, believing it to be the piggy bank, but learns the girl's sister is home and it's her suitcase. Led to the actual piggy bank, Kamo is amazed that the girl has a rubber piggy bank. Ashiki begins asking questions, learning that the girl and her sister were out the other day, only to return and notice money missing from her piggy bank. Exploring the room, Kamo gets his mustache stuck in some of the sister's jewelry, but when Ashiki scolds Kamo for not taking the case seriously, Kamo asks Ashiki why he thinks none of the jewelry had been stolen when the piggy bank was robbed. Ashiki admits that he has no idea, but the girl does add that she's been getting some silent phone calls lately and has been locking up early. Smirking, Kamo states that everything makes sense, collapsing to the ground only to declare that he gives up. As Ashiki scolds Kamo for giving up so easily, the sister comes home. Sitting down with the two girls, Ashiki learns that the sister was visiting her parents when the crime took place, but the girl butts in promising that she isn't lying about her piggy bank being lighter when they returned home. When the sister says the girl is simply imagining things, Kamo speaks up, suggesting that they all give up. As the girl declares that she remembered her piggy bank being tough like an iron statue, Kamo declares that he has all the pieces he needs to solve the issues, asking to break open the piggy bank. As they open up the piggy bank, the girl attempts to count the coins, but Kamo stops her, declaring that they will have forensics look for fingerprints. In the meantime, Kamo heads out for some fresh air, cutting to later that afternoon. Kamo is seen on a hill near a creek where Ashiki has met up with Kamo, reporting that none of the coins had the girl's fingerprint. As Kamo turns around, he reveals that they are at the same crime scene as Amamiya's this morning, both heading down to have a closer look. As Ashiki introduces Kamo as a friend, Kamo asks if Amamiya would be impressed if Ashiki solved the case, but entertaining Kamo's offer, Amamiya threatens to fire Ashiki if he doesn't solve the case. As Kamo lays down next to the corpse, he declares that everything is ready, tossing Ashiki a bag. Taking the stage, Ashiki starts by explaining the case of the missing money from the piggy bank, but Amamiya cuts Ashiki off, asking him to skip over such a trivial task. With Kamo standing up for Ashiki, Ashiki explains that the coins in the piggy bank only had the sister's fingerprint, taking out an exact replica of the girl's piggy bank and explaining that the coins weren't stolen and instead were replaced. Ashiki concludes that the sister is the culprit, but with a shaken look, the sister asks why she would ever have to lie about breaking the girl's piggy bank. Calming his nerves, Ashiki states that it has to do with the corpse of the man, something the girl does not deny. Ashiki deduces that the girl had returned home one day, only to stumble onto a stalker waiting for her, but having been chased into her living room by said stalker, the girl reached for the piggy bank, shattering and killing the man in self-defense. Since the coins were all covered in blood, the sister failed to fill a new piggy bank with the same amount of coins, and ended up moving the body to the nearby creek with her suitcase. With Ashiki finishing up his deduction, the girl asks her sister for the truth, but the sister admits that Ashiki was correct. When Ashiki tries to defend the sister for attacking the man in self-defense, Amamiya mentions that covering up a murder is a crime in itself, but out of nowhere, Kamo's eyes glow, prompting Kamo to order the sister to drown in the creek. With Ashiki holding Kamo back and everyone weirded out, the sister suddenly begins running towards the river, but when Amamiya attempts to grab a hold of the sister manages to break free. Luckily, Ashiki had chased the sister all the way into the water, allowing for Kamo to see the sister alive and well, just as he returned to his senses. Back at the station, Amamiya reports that Ashiki was right about the murder, but Amamiya is more curious about Kamo, having taken a liking to him. As Ashiki heads over to tell Kamo the good news, Kamo comes stumbling out of his apartment again, making Ashiki want to solve more difficult cases with Kamo, curious as to what Kamo is truly capable of. Cutting elsewhere, we enter the Blue Academy, where Principal Eam Emmerich is asked during a meeting if she remembers Kamonohashi Ron of the 87th class. With Eam and the anatomy instructor acknowledging that they do, the vice principal reveals that there have been reports of Kamo restarting his detective adventures. With various instructors arguing for and against Kamo being a detective once more, the principal orders for the tracking instructor to look into Kamo. Following Ashiki, we see him receive a call, suddenly rushing to a supermarket to meet up with Kamo, annoyed that Kamo is calling him to help shop for groceries. Kamo notes how normally people bring him food since he doesn't have money, but today is important since his cat ran out of food, forcing Ashiki to pay for Kamo's groceries. The employee reveals that the store is having a raffle today, handing Kamo a raffle ticket, which leads the two boys to the raffle station, where they read over the prizes. As Kamo steps up to spin the wheel, Kamo puts his all into the spin, shocked to see a golden ball appear, prompting the employee to announce that Kamo has won a hot spring vacation for 2 people. Kamo says he'll simply go twice instead of taking Ashiki, but the employee reminds Kamo that the trip is a one-time thing, threatening to cancel the trip if Kamo doesn't take someone else. As Kamo reluctantly fills out a form for himself and Ashiki, the employee mentions how the first place and second place prizes had already been won, but as Kamo and Ashiki leave, we see the tracking instructor hear about Kamo's hot spring trip. On the day of the trip, Kamo and Ashiki head to Benizome by taxi, learning that it was raining up until yesterday, only to be handed a pamphlet for the inn they'll be staying at. The taxi driver states that the location is called Benizome as the autumn leaves around the hot springs give off a Benny crimson color, but Kamo notices that they've been given the wrong pamphlet, as they are staying at the annex, not the main building. Acting weird, the taxi driver apologizes, handing Ashiki a single black and white piece of paper, swiftly dropping the boys off, only to speed off. Upon seeing the beat-up state of the Benizome annex, the boys wonder if the annex is even open, but out of nowhere some employees appear, along with the tracking instructor disguised as the innkeeper. The instructor thanks Ashiki for his police work, surprising Ashiki as he wonders how the instructor knows, but the instructor reveals that Ashiki's leather shoes are worn down, a common trait of police officers. With Ashiki amazed, Kamo steps up, correcting the instructor as reporters are just as likely to have worn down leather shoes, deducing that the instructor must have used the forms they filled, something the instructor doesn't deny. As the instructor leads the boys inside, he hands the boys a key to the hot spring, giving the boys until 8 a.m. the next day to use the hot spring, adding that dinner will be at 7 p.m. that night. Hearing that there are times for everything, the boys learn that there are 3 other parties staying at the same inn, but as the boys leave to check out the hot springs, the instructor gets excited, finally able to test out Kamo's capabilities. With Kamo and Ashiki enjoying the outdoors hot spring, Ashiki notes how the hot spring makes up for the rundown building, but Kamo adds that there is a legend the taxi driver didn't tell them about this inn. Kamo states that since the rivers nearby are so fast-flowing, it was common to have the hot spring overflow, so the innkeepers sacrifice a woman to stop the floods, but this ultimately led the hot springs to take on a crimson color. As Ashiki gets freaked out, he suddenly notices that Kamo's scar is bigger than he expected, learning that Kamo once received wounds all over his body, but only the scar on his neck remained. Ashiki notices a number in the scar, which Kamo confirms to be the number 6, representing his birth, but Kamo takes the chance to tease Ashiki for being a grandma's boy. Heading to the Beni room for some dinner, Kamo and Ashiki sit amongst the other guests, with Kamo being served an omurice covered in black sugar syrup. Kamo reveals that black sugar syrup helps him think, but Ashiki knows Kamo just likes sweets. Turning around, Kamo watches as a man and women are served some amazing array of dishes, along with a lone woman eating alone, but Kamo notes how there is one group of members missing, as the instructor said there will be 4 in total. Kamo smirks excitedly as for what is to come, taking out the Game of Life board game, only to ask Ashiki to play with him, but Ashiki apologizes to the other guest since Kamo is being too loud. Ashiki tells Kamo that it's conventional to play ping pong at the hot springs, something Kamo isn't against, finishing up their dinner, only to head to ping pong tables. Ashiki voices how dirty the room in general is, but Kamo notices an ancient scroll retelling the story of the Crimson Hue, making Kamo and Ashiki wonder if the legend is true. As the two prepare for their first match of ping pong, Kamo begins his serve, all whilst declaring that the loser must become the winner's slave for life. Completely caught off guard, Ashiki accidentally deflects the ball out a broken window, spotting it on a rock in the nearby river. Since there are no more balls, they both reason they should retrieve the lost ball, but with several minutes passing, the boys are quivering, having lost the ball in the river. As the boys hop into the hot spring to warm up, a sudden silhouette approaches, revealed to be Amamiya, who is also here to enjoy the hot spring. With Amamiya's cries echoing through the night, everyone has gathered in the dining area at around 10 p.m., all noticing Amamiya, who is completely embarrassed, having found out that she stumbled into the men's bathing area, afraid that Kamo now thinks she's a pervert. Just then, the woman from the other table cries that she wants a divorce, shocking her husband, but luckily Amamiya butts in, begging them not to divorce. With Ashiki realizing that Amamiya is drunk, Amamiya drunkenly heads elsewhere, but due to the commotion, the woman realizes she overreacted, telling her husband that she needs to cool down in the hot spring. Seeing that the husband is now alone, Kamo asks if he wants to play his Game of Life board game, managing to also convince the blonde women to join in as well. Cutting several hours later at 2 a.m., Kamo is dead last, all whilst the husband and the blonde dream of reliving their lives. Since it's already late, they pack up the board game, heading to sleep, all whilst the instructor watches from nearby. The next morning, a blood-curdling cry can be heard, following Amamiya, who runs into an employee who discovered a body. As everyone heads to the hot spring, they spot the wife's corpse floating in the hot spring, forcing Ashiki to hold back the husband as he cries out his wife's name, Sachiko. Amamiya notices that the body is entering rigor mortis, meaning that the death must have occurred sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. Getting close, Kamo promises to avenge Sachiko, something Amamiya finds very attractive. Kamo notes how there are too many leaves on the corpse's body, but the blonde woman cries that it is a curse, something that makes Kamo smirk. Signaling for Ashiki to take over, Ashiki begins asking the employee if they heard anything weird last night, but the employee reveals that since the inn is small, only one person takes turns watching over the employees, revealing that the instructor last night watched over everyone. The instructor brings up that he saw everyone playing the board game last night, all but Sachiko and Amamiya, declaring that Amamiya must be the culprit. As Amamiya hangs her head in shame, Kamo declares that Amamiya is innocent and that the culprit is someone else, stating that he'll prove that to everyone. Hearing that Kamo declares that he'll solve something, the instructor smirks, waiting for Kamo to overstep and allow Blue Academy to end Kamo's career. Sadly for the instructor, Kamo corrects himself, stating that Ashiki will be the one solving the case, scaring Ashiki as he has no idea where to start. Kamo cuts Ashiki off, stating that Ashiki has already found all the clues needed, revealing that they should focus on the secret legend of Benazome and how the water would turn red with leaves. The husband wonders if Amamiya can be cleared of suspicions, but Kamo is more curious as to why Amamiya looks so confused, learning that Amamiya didn't come by taxi and hence didn't read the pamphlets that told the legend. As Ashiki remembers Amamiya saying she came alone, Kamo expands on what Ashiki is saying, revealing that Amamiya came from the stations whereas the others only know of the legend since they took the taxi. Kamo concludes that the murder of Sachiko was an attempt to recreate the legend. Therefore, Amamiya can't be the culprit since she doesn't know what the legend is about, something that employees can confirm since the inn doesn't speak of the legend. With the instructor baffled that Ashiki came up with all of this, Kamo asks Ashiki who he thinks the murder was, but when Ashiki states he doesn't know, Kamo jokes that it may actually be the work of a curse. Just then the blonde speaks up, stating that last night as she was heading to dinner, she saw some white mist appearing from the hot spring, believing it to be something paranormal. At the same time, Kamo cries that he's found something, but when Ashiki goes to check what it is, he realizes it's their ping-pong ball from last night. Kamo concludes that the rain last night must have washed everything downstream, suddenly spotting a bath mat nearby, wondering if it can be used to retrieve the ping-pong ball. As Amamiya appears, she heads directly to Ashiki, only to reluctantly thank Ashiki for clearing her of suspicion earlier. Although Amamiya is clear of suspicion, Amamiya admits that the others won't trust her to lead the investigation, assigning Ashiki to take over the case, something Ashiki gladly accepts. With Amamiya reverting back to insulting Ashiki, she scolds herself for strangely acting weird yesterday, but upon hearing this, Kamo declares that he now has all the pieces he needs. Seeing Kamo's glorious eyes, Amamiya can't help but faint at the sight of Kamo's beauty, but at the same time the police arrive, making everyone lock eyes with each other. Heading upstairs, Kamo heads into one of the rooms, prompting the instructor to follow after Kamo, both entering adjacent rooms. As Ashiki fills the police in on what had transpired, the instructor smirks as he listens into Kamo's room. When Ashiki enters Kamo's room, he reports that the police have confirmed Sachiko had passed due to heart failure, something the husband was afraid would be the death of Sachiko. As Kamo asks for more information, the instructor is seen on the edge of his seat, waiting for Kamo to say something that the instructor can report to Blue Academy, but out of nowhere Kamo slams his hand onto the nearby wall. Having bought some time, Ashiki explains that Sachiko's heart failure was due to the difference in temperature between the outside and wet inside, something Kamo was waiting to hear, telling Ashiki that he now has all the pieces to solve the case himself. As Ashiki gathers everyone around, he declares that the case was indeed murder, stating that it's someone amongst them. Ashiki states that the murderer must have known of Sachiko's weak heart, declaring the husband to be the murderer, but the husband nervously asks why he would murder his own wife. When the husband reminds everyone that he was with everyone at the time of Sachiko's death, Ashiki interjects, stating that the husband had an alibi, but the husband had set a trap for his wife. As the husband panics, Ashiki takes out a bath mat, placing it at the top of the stairs into the hot spring, revealing that the husband hoped his wife would trip over. When Amamiya scolds Ashiki for his outrageous claim, Ashiki reveals that Sachiko had very poor vision, meaning without her glasses, she would easily fall for a simple trap. The blonde speaks up, wondering if that was enough to induce thermal shock, but Ashiki corrects everyone, stating that the hot spring wasn't filled with warm water, but instead freezing water. With everyone wondering how cold water could enter the hot spring, Ashiki shows off a discarded rain gutter, explaining that the gutter could have been used to draw ice-cold water from the nearby river, whilst also filtering out the warm water. This also explains why the blonde lady saw the mist last night, as it was the hot spring water being dumped into the nearby river. Finally, as for the abundant amount of leaves near Sachiko's body, Ashiki deduces that the river water must have naturally drawn in leaves, and because the man couldn't remove all the leaves in time, he instead chose to add more, hoping to pin it on the curse. Refusing to be accused, the husband declares that there was no way a man could set all of this up in the women's bath, but Ashiki states that the husband had swapped the bath curtains, explaining why Amamiya wound up in the men's bath. When the husband still refuses to accept such claims, Ashiki simply states that they'll check both curtains for fingerprints, ultimately making the husband finally admit to murder. Out of nowhere, the husband apologizes to the blonde, Michio, revealing that he had been having an affair with Michio, but even Michio is disgusted at the husband for slaying his own wife. As the police take away the husband, Ashiki searches for Kamo, spotting Kamo hiding behind some trees. Upon chasing after Kamo, Ashiki suddenly spots the instructor in a new outfit along with Kamo tied to a tree. The instructor reveals himself as the tracking instructor for Blue Academy, Spits Fire, revealing that he's here to determine if Kamo is trying to work as a detective once more. Kamo reveals that he knew Spitz was following him ever since they won the raffle, reassuring Spitz that Ashiki was doing all the detective work, but Spitz refuses to accept that. Kamo mocks Spitz for being so naive, stating how Spitz allowed himself to be spotted so easily, but this only enrages Spitz further. Spitz promises that if Kamo admits to doing detective work, he'll have Kamo's sentence be lighter, but Kamo deduces that Spitz has no such authority, especially since Spitz had to disguise himself. As Kamo begins cutting himself down, he hypothesizes that Spitz is quite desperate, either from making a bet, from being threatened, or is in need of Kamo's abilities. Completely read like a book, Spitz apologizes for everything, admitting that he needs Kamo's help. Spitz says that he's honed his abilities to track people down, in order to find his missing family, but having found no one at Blue Academy that could help, Spitz was desperate to consult Kamo himself. Upon hearing everything, Kamo refuses to help, especially since they haven't gotten to know Spitz yet. Spitz admits that it's normal to not trust him yet, but he promises to earn Kamo's trust, promising to report that Ashiki was the one that solved the case to the Blue higher-ups. With Ashiki happy to see that Spitz isn't a bad guy after all, Spitz praises Ashiki for solving Sachiko's death earlier, swinging away but promises to help with any tracking stuff in the future. Now alone, Kamo states that since Ashiki trusts him, Kamo will give Spitz a chance, but Ashiki changes topics, thanking Kamo for saving Amamiya earlier. Several days later, Amamiya tells Ashiki that there will be a joint investigation into the serial murders within the Aichi Prefecture, partnering with Eagle Eye Kawasimi Omito, a very skilled detective. When Ashiki begins praising Kawasimi for possibly becoming a superintendent, Ashiki realizes that Amamiya is also gunning for that position, finding out that Amamiya plans to have Ashiki collaborate with Kawasimi. Out of nowhere, Kawasimi arrives, immediately scolding several officers for not meeting correct dress codes, something Amamiya notes is due to his keen eyes along with his signature tweezers. Amamiya does admit that Kawasimi acts the same to higher-ups, making Kawasimi someone hard to be manipulated, adding that herself and Kawasimi used to work together for a bit. Spotting Ashiki standing by, Kawasimi approaches Ashiki, coldly declaring that Ashiki doesn't look fit to be a detective. With Amamiya and Kawasimi face to face, Kawasimi tries to order Amamiya around, but Amamiya simply destroys Kawasimi's tweezers, prompting Kawasimi to summon Yamane. Yamane immediately brings replacement tweezers, all whilst providing Kawasimi with folders on their upcoming case. Recognizing the name, Amamiya asks if Yamane is Kawasimi's partner, learning that Kawasimi considers himself the greatest detective ever and that Yamane is simply happy to work for said greatest detective. Pushing Ashiki forward, Amamiya states that Ashiki will be collaborating with Kawasimi, but Kawasimi states that he can't even sense Ashiki's presence, heading off to the crime scene with Yamane. Upon arriving at the scene, Yamane explains that there was a truck transferring works of arts, with one piece wounding up being a real human corpse with no hands. Kawasimi utters that he's seen something similar before, but when Ashiki tries to ask about it, Kawasimi and Yamane simply ignore Ashiki. Knowing that he must try to contribute somehow, Ashiki suddenly spots Kamo in a new disguise, revealing that he's here to help give Ashiki guidance on the case. Introducing himself to the others, Kamo tosses Sawashimi his business card, introducing himself as a consultant and a puppet master. Annoyed, Sawashimi kindly asks Kamo to leave, but Kamo reassures Sawashimi that he's no ordinary consultant. Having something on his mind, Sawashimi charges at Kamo's platypus puppet, declaring that platypus beaks are meant to be soft, but is surprised that Kamo already knew that. Allowing Kamo to stick around, Kamo learns that Sawashimi is another great detective, prompting Kamo to crumple his hand puppet, declaring that they'll solve the case first. When Ashiki mentions how Sawashimi has been withholding information from them, Kamo confronts Yamane, learning that there have been 3 other similar cases, where victims had been killed with a stab to the chest, but wound up with 2 severed hands. Yamane declares the murderer to have the name Hand Collector, something that gets Kamo fired up, knowing that he'll be greater than Sawashimi if Kamo can solve the case first. Sadly, Yamane reveals that Sawashimi had already narrowed down the case to a few suspects, with them even confronting who they believe is the murderer last night. But unfortunately both Sawashimi and Yamane were unable to subdue the Hand Collector. Sawashimi states that he'll be the one to capture the Hand Collector, but Sawashimi does reveal that the culprit they let get away is the most recent victim inside the truck. With Kamo intrigued, he enters the truck, kneeling before the victim, only to observe that the victim must have been taken to a warm place, having worn light clothing during such a cold time. Spotting a tattoo on the victim's arm, Kamo wonders what type of bird it could be, but Yamane chimes in, stating that it is a kelp bird, and it matches the tattoo the man had last night. Out of nowhere, Kamo asks for help taking off his hand puppets, but this makes Sawashimi scold Kamo for having put faith in Kamo. As Ashiki helps Kamo pull off his hand puppets to the side, Kamo times it perfectly, allowing Ashiki to fall back whilst removing the hand puppets in Sawashimi's direction. With Sawashimi easily evading Ashiki, Ashiki falls into Yamane, prompting Kamo to declare that Sawashimi is lying. Intrigued, Sawashimi hears Ashiki with the help of Kamo accuse Sawashimi of having extraordinary reflexes and agility, meaning there was no way Sawashimi failed to capture the handcuffed culprit last night. Sawashimi notes how he did hear about a brilliant detective solving cases recently, shocked to hear that it was Ashiki, but Sawashimi admits that he did lie. Sawashimi reveals that Yamane was the one that let the culprit escape, having come back with a missing button on his sleeve, but seeing as Yamane works for Sawashimi, Sawashimi takes the blame for not training Yamane correctly, something Ashiki realizes is quite admirable. As Yamane apologizes for failing, Kamo suddenly utters that Yamane is still missing a button on his sleeve, freaking Yamane out as he utters that he doesn't want to disappoint Sawashimi again. Luckily Kamo reveals that he had used Yamane's lost button for an eye on his platypus, prompting Yamane to utter that he found the button this time. But this gives Kamo all the clues he needs to solve the case. Taking out his phone, Kamo phones a mysterious person, putting him on speaker, making Ashiki realize that it's the tracking instructor Spitz. Spitz states the most recent victim is 48-year-old Mashanikoji Minoru, and having visited his apartment, Spitz reveals that Mashanikoji is indeed the hand collector, having stored all the hands in his apartment and fridge. As Ashiki and Kamo head elsewhere, Kamo tells Sawashimi that Ashiki will be the one to solve the case, cutting to Kamo and Ashiki in a bathroom, where Kamo tells Ashiki some crucial details. That evening, Kamo and Ashiki return, with Ashiki now stating that he'll explain everything that transpired. Ashiki starts by confirming that Mashanikoji is indeed the hand collector, but the reason for his death is due to a copycat, but Sawashimi already knew all of this. Ashiki reveals that Mashanikoji actually stabbed himself in the heart, having given up when Yamane and Sawashimi cornered him, but at the time Mashanikoji had a jacket, so someone must have hid the jacket to make the copycat murder seem realistic. Sawashimi realizes that since only he and Yamane were the only two that were with Mashanikoji last night, it means Yamane must be the copycat. When Yamane tries to refuse such a claim, Ashiki reminds Yamane that last night it would have been impossible to see anything when chasing after Mashanikoji, but the fact that Yamane had enough time to recognize Mashanikoji's unique tattoo makes Yamane suspicious. Still refuting Ashiki's claims, Ashiki reveals that Yamane had lost his handcuffs the previous night, hence why he panicked when he had lost his button. Ashiki suspects that Yamane had lost his handcuffs during his pursuit of the culprit, but seeing the opportunity, Yamane had made Michanikoji escape with said handcuffs, only to sever Michanikoji's hands to cover his basis. With Sawasumi unable to believe his most trusted committed something so foul, Ashiki reminds Sawasumi that Yamane did everything out of desperation to live up to Sawasumi's standards. As Yamane collapses admitting to everything, Sawasumi helplessly watches as Yamane is taken away, but Sawasumi promises to wait for his one true partner to return, bringing Yamane to tears. Turning to Ashiki and Kamo, Sawasumi reveals that he's jealous of their partnership, revealing that he knows Kamo is the true mastermind, but as Ashiki complains about how annoying Kamo is, Sawasumi praises Amamiya for having such a unique specimen like Ashiki. With several more days passing by, Ashiki chooses to check up on Koma, frightened to see that Koma has bloodshot eyes, but realizes that Koma had simply been addicted to watching psychics on TV. Following the show, Psychic Abilities, Fact or Fiction, we see the host Ono Yako introduce the psychic Torage Denkichi who needs to persuade the neurosurgeon Yusaki Mofu of their psychic abilities. The host spots Mofu sleeping, so Yako wakes Mofu up, asking why Mofu has all the bandages, amused to hear Mofu ran into issues when cutting an apple. When Ashiki wonders if Mofu is really a neurosurgeon, Kamo confirms that Mofu has 0.001 accuracy, but Ashiki thinks it's hard to believe seeing how clumsy Mofu is. As the host asks what psychic ability Torage will demonstrate today, Torage states that he'll be controlling people's mind with simply writing, something Kamo is excited to hear. Kamo explains that he actually doesn't believe in psychics, but Kamo wants them to be real in order to have more fun and complicated cases. With Torage starting off his demonstration, he calls for a participant in the crowd, promising to reward them with 100,000 yen if they can resist his psychic influence. Having the participant sit down with noise-canceling headphones, Torage begins scribbling down a command for the participant, shocking everyone when the participant suddenly begins jumping when they read it, just as Torage declared they would. When Torage writes for the participant to run, the participant is suddenly overwhelmed to follow the command upon reading it, but Kamo has already figured out the trick. Mofu interjects, stating that she knows the participant is working with Torage. Having analyzed Torage's current and previous participant demonstration, Mofu is able to deduce that everything had been staged. Impressed, Torage comes up with a counter-argument, stating that he'll now take the participant's life, scribbling down the word death, only to have the participant faint, declaring that a staged participant wouldn't willingly pass away. As the live broadcast cuts off the show, Kamo declares that they have no time to waste, both heading to the scene of the crime. As Ashiki introduces himself to the on-site police, Kamo is seen disguised as Torage's fanboy, getting up and close with the victim's corpse, but this draws Torage's attention. Seeing that Torage is nearby, Kamo flat out asks how Torage killed the participant, but Torage firmly states that he used his psychic abilities. Torage adds that there are no modern laws that can send him to jail, something Ashiki knows is also true as he can't use psychic rules as actual evidence, but Kamo is more interested in getting Torage's autograph. Torage uses the same marker he used to order the participant around to sign his autograph. Both Kamo and Ashiki note how thick the signature is, but as Torage leaves, he smirks, blaming Mofu for not believing in his psychic abilities, which led Torage to take a life. Now checking in on Mofu, the boys meet Mofu's assistant Shikata, reassuring Mofu that the death of the participant was not Mofu's fault. Mofu refuses to accept that she allowed someone to die in front of her as a trained professional. Kamo asks if Mofu believes in psychics, but Mofu isn't too sure, having diagnosed the participant was killed due to poison, specifically something potent. Hearing this, Kamo declares that he agrees, having spotted a mark on the victim's neck that could have been from a poisoned needle. Ashiki asks how Torage would have poisoned the participant, but Mofu reveals that Torage never made any suspicious actions towards the participant, and that there was no one behind the participant. As Mofu begins admitting defeat, Kamo jokingly states how proud he is of Torage, but upon hearing that Mofu had come directly from a surgery just to prove the psychic wrong, Kamo declares that they'll solve the case for Mofu. With everyone shocked at Kamo's change in demeanor, Kamo states that Ashiki will solve this case, going over the events that transpired. Kamo recounts that when the participant was ordered to die, he shut his eyes only to collapse to the floor, but when Mofu gave the participant CPR, the participant briefly came back, only to stop breathing again. Ashiki reports that there were no signs of a poisoned needle use, making Ashiki believe that psychics exist, but Kamo reveals that he has all the pieces he needs, stating that the trick involves the fact that it was done on TV. As Mofu gives Kamo some eye drops, we cut to Ashiki gathering everyone around, stating that he'll now reenact what Torage had done. Standing in the same position as Torage, Ashiki asks Mofu to act as the participant and Ashiki will hold up the same cue cards, asking to borrow Torage's marker. With Torage refusing to lend Ashiki his marker, Mofu gets annoyed, scolding Torage for taking the matter too lightly, but accidentally trips, managing to grab a hold of one of Torage's many markers in the process. Ashiki puts noise-canceling headphones on Mofu, first ordering Mofu to jump and run, but everyone is skeptical at what Ashiki is trying to prove. Next, Ashiki holds up the death cue card, asking Mofu to stand next to him while she reads it, shocking everyone when Mofu suddenly collapses. Ashiki reassures everyone that Mofu is fine, revealing that Torage did a little trick when showing the participant the death cue card, revealing that when the cue card is flipped, it also spells out sleep. Since the participant would pretend to act out anything Torage wrote, the participant pretended to sleep, and due to the noise-canceling headphones, the participant didn't know how severe his acting was. It wasn't until the show was cancelled that Torage used the chaos to secretly inject the poison, explaining why Mofu's CPR had seemed to wake the participant up, only for the poison to finally take their lives. Refusing to accept such nonsense, Torage demands to know where the murder poison needle is, but Ashiki simply takes out Torage's thick double-sided marker, revealing that the thinner side of the marker concealed the poison needle. With Torage out of luck, he admits defeat, but reveals that the participant that he was working with threatened to reveal Torage's tricks. Out of nowhere, Kamo tosses Torage his marker, ordering him to stab himself. As Torage slowly raises the pen towards his face, Ashiki dashes forwards, prompting Torage to stab Ashiki with the pen. As Kamo and Torage snap out of it, Mofu and Ashiki admit that there is not enough time to save Ashiki, but luckily, earlier when Mofu had tripped, she had unknowingly grabbed one of Torage's regular markers, meaning Ashiki wasn't poisoned. As Kamo and Ashiki head elsewhere, Kamo apologizes for putting Ashiki through all of that, stating that he'll stop solving cases, that way Ashiki won't have to constantly risk his life to mitigate Kamo's curse. Heading outside, Ashiki helps untangle a tangled-up Mofu, shocked to hear the reason Mofu is so committed to disproving psychics is because she once had a patient that refused normal medicine, believing that a psychic could heal them, but ended up passing due to said beliefs. Realizing something, Ashiki thanks Mofu for the inspiration, rushing off, but Mofu secretly wonders how Kamo was able to order Torage around. As Ashiki rushes to confront Kamo outside, Kamo reiterates how he doesn't want to put Ashiki's life at risk again, but Ashiki reminds Kamo that he's doing what he loves. Changing topics, Ashiki invites Kamo to watch a meteor shower with him on Nandan Island, a location famous for Kamo's favorite black sugar syrup. Several days later, Kamo and Ashiki ride a boat to their destination, surprised that the boat driver, Takumi Jumanji, recognizes Ashiki, having heard that Ashiki is an acquaintance of Kawasimi. Getting suspicious, Kamo asks why a famous detective like Ashiki was invited to this meteor shower, learning that there was an incident that happened a long time ago. But before Jumanji can divulge what happened, Kamo blocks his ears, not wanting to be a detective anymore. With Jumanji reassuring Ashiki that everything will be fine, they make it onto the island where Jumanji gives Kamo and Ashiki a tour, telling them about the luscious sugarcane that farmers across the world visit to harvest. As Jumanji reveals that it'll just be the observatory staff and the guests, Kamo gets excited being so close to the sugarcanes that yield the black sugar syrup, but Ashiki gets more annoyed hearing that Kamo wants to try hula hooping on the island. With Jumanji happy to see Ashiki and Kamo bicker, he states that he'll request that their chefs tonight add black sugar syrup to their meals, ultimately heading to the Nandan Observatory. Upon entering the observatory, they make note of the lobby and cafeteria on the first floor, but find it weird that there is a pistol being displayed. Jumanji states that the pistol is a replica meant to ward off evil spirits, as it was traditional to keep flintlocks as a charm to protect one's sugarcane. Heading to the second floor, Jumanji states the guest will be staying on the second floor, leading them to the door that opens to the observation dome. But upon opening the door, the three hear a massive cry. With the sound of the voice revealed to be Uno the chef, Uno acknowledges Jumanji as the director, apologizing as she was simply relieving her stress in the soundproofed room. Uno tells the director about Donzawa the guest bossing her around for getting his order incorrect, but gets more pissed hearing that another guest wants her to add black sugar syrup to her menu. As Uno realizes that Kamo and Ashiki are guests themselves, she apologizes for not being more professional, all of a sudden spotting Donzawa enter the room. Immediately Ashiki gets weirded out by Donzawa's peculiar haircut, learning that Donzawa had cut his hair to be able to look through a telescope, but seeing the other guest, Donzawa calls everyone impure. Butting in, Onodera introduces herself as a photographer, stating that Donzawa is simply disappointed that people who won't appreciate the meteor shower are here. Onodera does mention another guest present, prompting John Grizzly to enter, someone Kamo recognizes as Blue Academy closed circle theory instructor, and one of the only people Kamo respected. When John asks why Kamo is here, Kamo states he's simply here on holiday, prompting the director to state that all the guests are here, making Kamo wonder why such a high-class detective like John is present. When Onodera offers to tell everyone about the horrible incident that occurred several years ago, Kamo states that he doesn't want to hear it, but gives in, blaming Ashiki for convincing him. Taking over, John recounts that 10 years ago, the conditions for the Leonid meteor shower were perfect, but sadly 6 individuals along with the director at the time were all gunned down, something that surprises Kamo. The current director admits that his father was the director 10 years ago, and that the gun was never found nor was the killer identified. Jumanji states that he wanted to honor his father's last wish to hold another viewing party, something that the guests praised Jumanji for doing, but out of nowhere a girl interrupts. Apologizing for Jumanji's tragic past, the voice introduces herself as the idol of constellation Orion, Orihime. With Ishiki completely infatuated by Orihime's beauty, but out of nowhere the dome begins to open, revealed to be Kamo who was simply messing around. As the massive telescope spins, Jumanji reveals that a computer automatically moves the telescope to the nearest stars, but Ashiki learns that they won't be viewing the meteor shower through the massive telescope, as viewing it with their eyes will be far more enjoyable. Jumanji states that they'll be viewing the meteor shower on the roof at 11 p.m., asking everyone to head to the buffet, but Uno and Ashiki can't help but notice Kamo has doused all his food with black sugar syrup. Donzawa and Onodera reveal that Kamo is actually quite well informed when it comes to astronomy, not even surprised that it's one of Kamo's hidden skills. Just then, Ashiki wonders how much John knows about Kamo's curse, heading over to chat with John. Making some small talk, Ashiki reassures John that Kamo isn't doing any detective work, but asks to know more about the incident that led to Kamo's expulsion. John states that 5 years ago, as part of an exam, students worked with police to solve cases. Since Kamo was quite skilled, he managed to track down the base of 7 killers, but when the police raided the location, Kamo was found alongside the 7 murderers that had been killed. The incident was deemed the bloody training incident, but since Kamo couldn't remember what had transpired during the mission, Kamo was forbidden from obtaining his detective license, something John disagreed with as he would have sentenced Kamo to death. Out of nowhere, Kamo suddenly begins hula hooping, forcing Ashiki to order him to stop before Kamo throws up, but having had enough fun, Kamo states he'll be heading to bed. Several hours pass, and the Leonid meteor shower finally commences, captivating everyone's eyes, but Ashiki wonders where Onodera is, having been absent for 2 hours now. Just then, the dome begins to open and a gunshot can be heard, prompting everyone to run towards the observatory room, where they realize the door is locked. With the help of everyone, they manage to barge the door open, but with the lights not working, Uno rushes to get a flashlight. Upon shining the light around the room, everyone is horrified to see Onodera shot and Kamo laying beside her. With Kamo stating that he doesn't remember what happened, everyone begins crying for Kamo to be restrained, but John roars for everyone to freeze as he needs to analyze the situation. With Kamo putting his faith in John and Ashiki, John examines Onodera's corpse, noting how her body is still warm with a gunshot wound perfectly through her heart. As John holds onto the gun, he notes that all the lights in the room have been shattered and that there is no possible way to escape through the dome, the vents, or any hidden passage. With his observations, John states that the killer can only be Kamo, but when Kamo tries to point out that someone must have locked the door, he's surprised to see that there is a set of master keys lying beside him. With no other choice, John orders Ashiki to arrest Kamo, which Kamo doesn't disagree with. As people fetch Kamo's shoes, John orders Jumanji to call the police on the mainland, cutting to a room where Ashiki asks if Kamo reckons it's the same bloody incident from 5 years ago. Kamo admits that everything feels all too familiar, shaking as he believes he truly did shoot Onodera, but Ashiki reminds Kamo that they shouldn't operate on pure speculation and that Kamo would never harm the innocent. Realizing something, Kamo reveals that he's never been good with a gun, meaning it must be someone else that framed Kamo, since Onodera's gunshot wound was perfectly through her heart. With Kamo chained inside the room, Ashiki rushes outside, allowing Kamo to relax a bit, admitting that he had panicked 5 years ago, but is relieved to have Ashiki to put his faith in. As a storm begins to brew on the island, Jumanji gets notified that police won't be able to make it to the island until the morning, but at the same time Ashiki is seen in the observatory dome room. Ashiki is sad that he couldn't find any hidden escape paths, but upon inspecting the shattered lights, he realizes that they've all been precisely broken with a single bullet, right down the middle. Knowing that Kamo couldn't possibly perform such a feat, Ashiki kneels next to Onodera, praying for her, only to realize that the computer in the room must have some sort of recording when the dome opened and there were gunshots. As Ashiki stumbles onto several files, someone sneaks up behind him, but when Ashiki turns around, John apologizes, having thought Ashiki was the criminal. John states that he's brought a ladder to further inspect the dome, dead set on gathering evidence against Kamo, but John knows Ashiki still wants to prove Kamo as innocent. John states that he's already interviewed everyone, informing Ashiki that Onodera had disappeared around 11 p.m. to get her camera equipment, but John notes how weird it was for her not to have it set up earlier. Additionally, it's apparent that it was 1 a.m. when Onodera was shot. John reveals that Jumanji had visited his office around 11:30 p.m. but had returned by midnight. Donzawa had gone to the bathroom at midnight, but had returned before 1 a.m. when the gunshot was heard. Uno was in the kitchen from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. but was with Orihime when the gunshot was heard, and Orihime was live streaming up until 12:40 a.m. when she headed to the kitchen to chat with Uno. Since John and Ashiki remained on the rooftop the entire night, it makes Kamo the only possible suspect, having gone to bed at 10:40 p.m. With Ashiki at a loss for words, Ashiki states that he refuses to accept Kamo as the criminal, disappointing John, as Ashiki is acting out of pure emotions. John wonders what Ashiki and Kamo's relationship is, surprised to hear that Ashiki and Kamo are friends, revealing that Kamo used to never allow anyone to get close to him and only strived for logical perfection. Changing topics, John asks if Ashiki found anything, prompting Ashiki to reveal how the lights were shot and that the telescope did indeed record something, but it only shows the inside of the closed dome up until when the dome opened towards the North Star and a gunshot can be heard. Evaluating all the evidence, John suddenly realizes something, handing Ashiki a key to uncuff Kamo as John knows Kamo isn't the real culprit. John warns Ashiki to act fast, as something similar to the mass killing may occur, but cutting to Kamo, Kamo praises Ashiki for clearing his name. When Ashiki asks to know what John had deduced, Kamo reveals that it would have been impossible to shoot down the lights in a pitch-dark room, meaning the lights were either shot before 11 p.m. or after 1 a.m. Since everyone had discovered the dark room at 1 a.m., it means that the lights were shot before 11 p.m. Additionally, Kamo didn't have shoes on, and Kamo and Onodera's bodies were on opposite sides of the telescope, meaning it would have been impossible for Kamo to shoot Onodera given his circumstances. As Kamo prepares to leave the room, Kamo reveals that his brain is still sleepy, as he had been drugged, hence he went to bed early. When Ashiki accuses Uno of such an act, Kamo is clearly more interested in consuming more black sugar syrup, all whilst John stumbles onto some fishing line tied to the telescope. With Kamo and Ashiki back in Kamo's room, Kamo states that the criminal must have carried Kamo out of his room. But upon seeing that there are no clues left behind, Kamo deduces that it must have been a targeted attack. When Ashiki mentions how John wanted to apologize later, Kamo mentions how John's admirable personality is what Kamo respects about John, but out of nowhere, both Ashiki and Kamo suddenly spot John fall past their bedroom window. As Kamo and Ashiki rush to the bottom floor, John cries that everything is a trap, but when Kamo and Ashiki reach John's body, Kamo declares that John is dead. Getting serious, Kamo states that for a blue instructor like John to be killed, it must mean that the criminal is quite skilled and dangerous. Laying beside John's corpse, Kamo declares he'll get revenge, noting how there were no signs of a struggle, but spots John grasping onto some fishing line. At the same time, Jumanji and Danzawa arrive, shocked to see John is dead, but wonders what Kamo is here. With Ashiki reassuring everyone that Kamo is innocent, Ashiki gathers everyone up, revealing the same gun John had held onto was used to murder John. Going over everyone's alibis, Ashiki states that Jumanji was in his office when John was shot, Danzawa was in the first-floor restroom, Uno was fast asleep, and Orihime was live streaming. With everyone seemingly panicking at the thought that they've all been cursed, Kamo speaks up, completely pissed that the culprit has the balls to blend in and act innocent. As Ashiki and Kamo go over the crime scene once more, Ashiki reenacts how Ashiki and the others barged open the locked door, but Kamo asks Ashiki how he thinks the criminal had locked the door from the outside when Kamo had the only master key and was locked inside. Ashiki states that he believes the criminal must have used the fishing line to lock the door from the outside, but Kamo sadly reveals that the gaps of the door had been sealed with adhesive, meaning the criminal is more formidable than Kamo had initially thought. When Ashiki goes on to explain what transpired next, Kamo heads over to Onodera's corpse, spotting the vent in his line of sight, but it seems to be sealed shut. As Kamo asks Ashiki to help turn off all the lights, Ashiki manages to adjust his eyes to the darkness, spotting the switch for the room lights along with the open and close switch for the dome. With Kamo realizing something, Ashiki begins to break down, fearing that the culprit will get away, but as Ashiki turns on the lights, he gets annoyed that Kamo has begun hula hooping. Kamo mentions how the fishing line got caught on his hula hoop, but when Ashiki still doesn't get it, Kamo declares that they've already solved the case. All that's left is to find the culprit. With Kamo tossing his hoop over Ashiki, Orihime suddenly appears, catching the hula hoop, only to ask if Ashiki had any more flashlights. Orihime mentions how Uno is quite annoyed at everyone asking her for flashlights, but with that final clue, Kamo declares that he now has all the pieces to catch the criminal. As Ashiki begins assessing the situation, he gathers everyone in the observatory dome, apologizing for the sudden meeting, as he declares the murderer is indeed amongst them. Starting off, Ashiki recounts how there was another gunshot sound, followed by the death of John. Ashiki reveals that since the gunshot sound came from the rooftop, the murderer had intended for people to rush to the rooftop, but since Kamo and Ashiki saw John through their window, they managed to find John's body first. Ashiki reveals that the murderer must have been on the rooftop with John whilst it was still raining. Therefore, when they came to check on John's body, they purposely didn't bring an umbrella to conceal the fact that they were outside prior. With Ashiki declaring Jumanji as the murderer, Jumanji calmly expresses that he followed everyone outside out of shock, but upon seeing Kamo's cold glare, Jumanji reminds Ashiki that he was on the roof with everyone at the time of Onodera's death. Firing back, Ashiki reveals that he already knows Jumanji's trick, having snuck off before the incident. Jumanji had put Onodera to sleep, dragging her into the observatory alongside Kamo. With all the lights already shattered, Jumanji had planted Kamo with the master key and the gun, only to lock and glue the door shut from the outside. When the others wonder how Jumanji locked the doors without the key, Ashiki reveals that Jumanji had given Onodera less of the sleeping drug, allowing her to wake up after he glued the door. Since Onodera was still drowsy, she naturally went to turn on the lights, but when the lights didn't turn on, Onodera headed towards the door, accidentally locking the door from the inside. Even if Ashiki can explain the locked door, the others still want to know how Onodera was then murdered. prompting Ashiki to reveal that Jumanji used another trick. Showing off the fishing line John left behind, Ashiki reveals that the fishing line was tied to the telescope and a gun hidden in the vents. This way, when Onodera went to open the dome for some moonlight, the telescope would rotate and naturally pull the trigger. Since the gun was aimed at the light switch, Onodera was shot, having stood in front of the switch. When Jumanji tries to point out that there couldn't have been a gun in the vent since there was already one next to Kamo, Ashiki reveals that the gun next to Kamo and the one John confiscated was the replica gun, whereas the gun in the vent was retrieved by Jumanji shortly after they entered the room, and ultimately used to murder John. Smirking, Jumanji demands to know why he would murder people, but Ashiki reveals that before they barged open the door, Jumanji had requested flashlights, concluding that Jumanji knew the room would be dark before they even entered. Completely caught, Jumanji reveals that he killed Onodera because she was here to learn more about the murder that happened 10 years ago, revealed to be a journalist in disguise. Jumanji cries that it was Onodera's fault for snooping around, but Kamo deduces that Jumanji wanted to hide his gun from her, the same gun used in the accident 10 years ago. Jumanji reveals that his father was the one that shot all the guests 10 years ago, only to take his own life, but when Jumanji found that out, he swore to hide that secret forever. With Jumanji blaming Onodera and John for trying to catch him, Kamo suddenly orders Jumanji to shoot himself, but before Jumanji can, Ashiki knocks the gun out of Kamo's hand. Sadly, Jumanji had used this chance to slip a pill into his mouth, but Kamo demands to know why he's being targeted. With Jumanji uttering that a mysterious person has been pulling all the strings from the shadows, Jumanji begins to foam from the mouth, whispering the phrase, "Night turns to dawn only to pass away." As the sun rises, Ashiki notifies everyone that the police will be arriving soon, but Kamo is left alone with Jumanji's corpse, curious as to who this mastermind is, having set up everything and invited Kamo onto the island, with the intention of framing Kamo for murder in front of a blue instructor John. Remembering Jumanji's cryptic, "Night turns to dawn" words, Kamo heads to open the dome, suddenly noticing something. But just then Ashiki arrives with the police. As the police secure the body, a mysterious policeman suddenly appears, only to cut over to Ashiki, who thanks Orihime for giving her statement, getting flustered by her beauty. With the police leaving with all the bodies, Kamo states he's upset John is no longer with them, having been one of the people that Kamo could have trusted. Bringing up the bloody training incident, Kamo shows Ashiki a picture of the crime scene, realizing that Onodera's blood resembles the marking on Kamo's neck. Kamo notes how the blood training incident was the only one in history with such strange circumstances, and it was also the first time Kamo obtained the curse, meaning there is a mastermind that has been toying with Kamo for the past 5 years. Back on the boat, the lone suspicious policeman stands guard over the body, signaling for Jumanji to reveal that he had faked his death. Jumanji thanks the policeman for helping with the murder of Onodera and faking his death, amazed that the legendary House of M, geniuses of the criminal underworld, would help out. When Jumanji begins rambling on about how genius Kamo was with his deductions, the policeman silences Jumanji with a bullet through the skull, only to follow up by peeling off his mask, only for the mysterious man to make a phone call to his brother. Elsewhere, another mysterious man picks up the call, happy to hear that his brother had met Kamo for the first time, amused to hear that Kamo turned pale upon seeing the mark they left at the crime scene. The brothers mention how Kamo is the 6th generation of an enemy from their family along with the 9th generation for a certain other family, revealing that Kamo has the blood for the great detective Sherlock Holmes and the blood from the mastermind James Moriarty. Back on the island, Kamo seems to have a change in mood, now hula hooping to relieve his stress. Kamo asks Ashiki if he'll continue to work with him, satisfied to hear that Ashiki won't stop being by Kamo's side, rewarding Ashiki with a jug of black sugar syrup. With Kamo and Ashiki returning home, Ashiki and Kamo begin cleaning Kamo's padded floor, but Kamo notices Ashiki is upset. Ashiki asks if Kamo is different since coming back from the observatory, wondering why Kamo thinks the boat that carried the bodies from the observatory was sunk by the mastermind, but Kamo reiterates that the mastermind is simply tying up all the loose ends. Regardless, Ashiki is concerned at how relaxed Kamo is, but Kamo states that they would be wasting time thinking about the mastermind, leading Ashiki to realize Kamo's cat is fast asleep under the floor padding. Kamo brings out a gift for Amamiya, asking Ashiki to deliver it to her, but when Ashiki clocks in and hands Amamiya the gift, Amamiya neglects the gift, informing Ashiki that she has a job for him. With no other details, Ashiki heads to conference room 3, greeting a blonde lady that gets excited seeing Ashiki. Introducing herself as Monkey Chikori from Lime Weekly, Monkey hands Ashiki her business card, revealing that she's here to spend the day with Ashiki in order to write about him in their upcoming issue for people to watch. Surprised, Ashiki mentions how Lime Weekly normally covers athletes and entertainers, but Monkey states that since Ashiki is the genius detective that solved so many murders, Monkey would be honored to write about Ashiki. Just then, Ashiki realizes that most of his cases weren't reported on the news, but Monkey reveals that she has a fascination with detectives. Monkey states that she was kidnapped when she was younger, and it was ultimately a detective that saved her, explaining that she's been obsessed with detectives all her life, even becoming a reporter just so she can learn more about them. Seeing how infatuated Monkey is with detectives, Ashiki hesitates to tell her it's truly Kamo solving the cases, uttering that he's currently not working on any big cases at the moment. With Monkey excited to follow Ashiki around, they both head out, but Ashiki feels bad for Monkey since most of his job involves piles of paperwork. Stopping at a nearby cafe, they both head in for some tea and coffee, leading Monkey to order some hot cocoa and Ashiki some iced black coffee. Upon looking up at the employee, Ashiki is shocked to see Kamo as the cashier, asking to have a quick chat with Kamo privately. Ashiki demands to know why Kamo is taking random part-time jobs, but Kamo reminds Ashiki that they haven't received a case in ages. Peeping at Monkey, Kamo asks if Ashiki is on a date with a reporter, surprising Ashiki as he asks how Kamo knows Monkey is a reporter. Kamo simply states that Monkey glanced at the magazine racks upon entering the store. Plus Monkey has comfortable shoes for running along with business cards stuffed in her phone case. As Ashiki reassures Kamo that he's simply hanging out with Monkey for work, 3 female customers enter the store, all amazed by the fancy-looking building. One of the ladies says she'll take a picture of the store sign first, prompting the 2 other ladies to order 3 lattes, but first Kamo gives Ashiki and Monkey their cocoa and black drinks. Seeing his drink, Ashiki suspects Kamo simply gave him black sugar syrup, annoyed as he demands to know if Kamo is truly working at the cafe. Smirking, Kamo proceeds to masterfully craft 3 platypus lattes, but sadly one of the ladies mistakes the platypus drawing as a duck. With Ashiki laughing at Kamo's terrible latte drawing, Monkey suddenly takes a picture of Ashiki and Kamo together, explaining to Kamo that she is writing an article about Ashiki's detective work, but Kamo is clearly shaken, realizing Monkey is a crime reporter. Serving Monkey and Ashiki a massive latte, Ashiki clearly gets annoyed seeing how weird Kamo is acting, but Kamo reveals that crime reporters are very useful to detectives, therefore they need to build a good relationship with Monkey. When Kamo tries to butter Monkey up, Monkey cries for Kamo to stop wasting Ashiki's time, pleasing Kamo as Monkey clearly respects Ashiki highly. Out of nowhere, one of the girls suddenly collapses, prompting the other girls to cry her name Julie. Rushing over to inspect Julie, Kamo orders Ashiki to call the ambulance and police, deducing that Julie has been poisoned. As the police block off and secure the crime scene, the police report to Ashiki that a cyanide capsule was found in the women's cup, but at the same time Kamo is seen promising to avenge Julie. Out of nowhere, Monkey orders Kamo to clear the scene, stating that the great detective Ashiki needs room to solve the case. Happy to see Monkey speak so highly of Ashiki, Kamo utters that only 3 people could be the possible murderers, these being Kamo himself and the 2 ladies. With Monkey declaring that Ashiki will solve the case, Monkey pulls Ashiki aside asking Ashiki about his thoughts on other complex and famous cases, but Kamo takes the chance to suggest that Monkey should begin bringing cases to Ashiki first, something Ashiki knows is really to benefit Kamo. Having gathered the 3 suspects, Ashiki asks Kamo what he was doing during the crime, but Kamo simply brings up the fact that he was annoyed seeing one of the ladies mistaken his platypus art as a duck. Moving on, Ashiki asks the lady who mistook Kamo's art, Hayami, what she did after carrying the lattes to the others. Hayami states that as soon as she arrived at the table, Julie had asked the girls to gather for some pics, but soon after Hayami had to take a phone call with the manager of her part-time job. Hayami admits that the phone call wasn't long, and that Julie was the first to select a latte, but Kamo wonders what Tamada was doing. Monkey butts in asking Kamo to allow Ashiki to do the talking, but speaking up, Tamada reveals that Julie had purposely selected the cup furthest away from herself, shocking Kamo and Ashiki as they wonder how the murderer knew Julie would select the random cup. With Ashiki asking Hayami and Tamada to give him time to think, Ashiki wonders how they can inspect the lattes, but Kamo suggests Ashiki check Monkey's phone and Julie's social media to see if they have any photos before the crime. Asking Monkey for her photos, Monkey shows off the photos she's snapped, impressing Kamo as he notes his platypus latte truly is beautiful. Next, Ashiki scans Julie's social media, landing on a photo of Julie holding up her latte, but suddenly Kamo realizes something. As Kamo heads off to retrieve something, Ashiki racks his brain for any solution, but Monkey is surprised to see Ashiki struggling so much. Returning, Kamo shows off a massive hand towel with their cafe logo, declaring that he solved the case. With Monkey weirded out, Kamo heads out back, prompting Ashiki to ask Monkey to hide any blades in the cafe, fearing that Kamo's curse will harm the murderer. That evening, Ashiki gathers everyone once more, declaring that Julie was indeed murdered. When Tamada wonders how the murder got Julie to select the random latte, Ashiki reveals that Julie had a tendency to do things that drew attention to herself. An example is of Julie being in the center of all her pictures. Hayami mentions how the lattes were exactly the same though, but Ashiki reveals that the culprit only needed to change the lattes slightly, showing Julie's last photo. Glaring at Hayami, Ashiki asks if Hayami knows why two of the lattes had misshapen eyes of the platypus drawings, prompting Hayami to cry out in defeat. Collapsing to the ground, Hayami screams that when she got a job at a talent agency, Julie took the chance to steal her boyfriend. As Ashiki scolds Hayami for her demented way of thinking, Kamo suddenly orders Hayami to bash her own head, forcing Hayami to mindlessly walk towards a large teapot. Rushing towards Hayami, Ashiki manages to knock Hayami down with a back of coffee beans, but as Kamo thanks Ashiki for saving her, Monkey is seen smirking. With the case wrapped up, Ashiki apologizes for the mess today, but Monkey states that she saw a true detective in Ashiki today, hoping to follow Ashiki around more in the future. As Kamo serves some lattes to celebrate Ashiki and Monkey's new friendship, Ashiki scolds Kamo for acting weird, but their interaction makes Monkey giggle. Cutting to the Eastern Japan General Hospital, we see Mofu inform Kamo that his curse isn't a genetic thing. Therefore, Mofu suggests that Kamo undergo some tests to help uncover the curse's secrets. Back with Ashiki, we see Amamiya order Ashiki to head to Aichi, but when Ashiki wonders why, Amamiya mentions Sawasimi is currently at Aichi. Amamiya reveals that since Yamane was arrested, Sawasimi's arrest rate has decreased drastically, but when Ashiki wonders if Amamiya truly cares about Sawasimi, Ashiki realizes that Amamiya simply wants Ashiki to guarantee she won't have any competition for her superintendent title. As Ashiki travels to Aichi by train, Ashiki wonders why Kamo is tagging along, but Kamo mentions how if Sawasimi is failing to solve some cases, maybe Kamo can snatch them from Sawasimi. Ashiki asks if Kamo is worried about Sawasimi as well, but leads Kamo to begin digging deep, reminding Ashiki that he didn't care for anyone else in the past. Ashiki suddenly remembers that John Grizzly had told Ashiki that Kamo was the ideal detective with no flaws since he had no friends, but taking the chance, Ashiki asks Kamo if he has any friends, shocked to hear Kamo truly didn't have any friends. Thinking for a moment, Kamo says Ashiki is his first friend, relieving Ashiki as he's happy that Kamo is slowly changing. Arriving at Nagoya Station, Kamo stops at the station, stating that he'll meet up with Ashiki at Aichi Station, hinting that he has some business to attend to. With Ashiki heading to his assigned station, he begins heading out in search of Sawasimi, but suddenly hears Sawasimi scolding an officer for not being clean-shaven. The officer reveals that he's undercover, prompting Sawasimi to apologize as he learns that another on-duty officer, Kimyu, will be collaborating with the undercover officer. When Sawasimi demands to know who Kimyu is, Kimyu apologizes for the late introduction, scanning Kimyu's badge, learning Kimyu Kimiyasu is a constable. Realizing that he's overstepping, Sawasimi suddenly spots Ashiki, both heading to grab some lunch. As Ashiki munches on some udon, Sawasimi deduces that Ashiki is here because Amamiya wants to see how far Sawasimi has fallen, surprising Ashiki as Sawasimi knows Amamiya quite well. Sawasimi admits that he's lost his touch, but even though Sawasimi doesn't care what the higher-ups say, he's still motivated to solve crimes. But for some reason Sawasimi can't see things like he used to. When Ashiki tries to comfort Sawasimi, Sawasimi recommends Ashiki buy some souvenirs, both heading to a nearby supermarket. As Ashiki finishes up shopping, he suddenly spots a sign warning people of a mad chameleon, a random attacker Sawasimi knows targets students during the open, attacking them with a wrench, only to steal the victims' phones. Ashiki finds it weird that the chameleon only steals phones, leading Sawasimi to reveal that evidence has led to the same perpetrator, but the attacker has the ability to disguise themselves, hence the name chameleon. Sawasimi states that the attacker was seen as a boy, a man, a woman and many more, but just then they both spot a businessman attacked by an attacker with a wrench. As the attacker steals the man's phone, Sawasimi orders Ashiki to chase after the attacker whilst he calls the ambulance, leading Ashiki to tail after the attacker. Sadly, the attacker had pushed over a lady, distracting Ashiki long enough to disappear into a nearby clothing shop. Returning to Sawasimi, Ashiki reports that he has gathered everyone in the clothing store the attacker disappeared into, but sadly none of them are wearing the same outfit as the attacker at the time. Sawasimi praises the attacker, since they probably hid their clothing in the clothing store, but worst of all Sawasimi reveals that the businessman was actually a student and has been pronounced dead. Getting serious, Sawasimi asks if Ashiki is sure he's gathered the possible suspects, learning that Ashiki confirmed that there was no way to escape due to the blocked-off exit and heavily guarded entrance. Seeing as the attacker performed the exact actions as the mad chameleon, Sawasimi declares that he'll finally catch the chameleon, pointing his tweezers at the youngest suspect, only to hesitate changing targets, but after a while of thinking, Sawasimi admits that he can't deduce who the attacker is. Just then Kamo calls Ashiki, asking if Ashiki had met up with Sawasimi yet, learning that Ashiki is currently tangled up in an interesting murder case. Kamo perks up hearing that the chameleon can change what they look like, asking Ashiki to wait as he heads to where Ashiki is. In the meantime, a police officer reports that security cameras around the store couldn't see the culprit's face, but Sawasimi knows that the attacker must be at least 170 centimeters tall to be able to attack the businessman of a similar height. Able to narrow down the suspects, Sawasimi once again tries to search for something, but upon failing, agrees to let the suspects go for now, having taken down the information already. With Sawasimi apologizing to Ashiki for not performing like his usual self, Kamo suddenly arrives, but has been arrested for acting so suspiciously. Greeting Kamo, Sawasimi asks for Kamo's help, reassuring Ashiki that he already knows Kamo is the true detective. Kamo first asks why the student was in a suit, learning that the student was probably out job hunting, normal since two previous victims were a mock exam supervisor and a part-time office worker. Kamo realizes that all the victims were wearing suits, deducing that since the attacker's appearance changes every time, it must mean that all the victims are lying. When Ashiki demands to know why the victims would lie after being attacked, Kamo suggests that they feel guilty being involved in a scam, something Sawasimi knows as a "It's me" scam. Sawasimi explains that the victims must have dressed up in suits and participated in scamming random elderly, but the students fear if the culprit is caught, their scam will be exposed as well, meaning the attacker and victims are all connected by this scam. Kamo deduces that there is some power struggle within the scam, explaining why the attacker only steals the victims' phones, as the attacker prevents the culprit from notifying the others. With Sawasimi amazed by Kamo's deduction, Kamo mentions how Sawasimi would have easily figured this all out in the past, but Sawasimi admits he's not his usual self. Having seen enough, Kamo declares that Sawasimi hasn't been sleeping nor eating enough, prompting Sawasimi to declare that he's been working hard to ensure that no one else is pressured like Yamane. At that moment, Kamo states that Sawasimi is simply suppressing his true self, allowing Sawasimi to slowly pick apart Kamo's unorganized outfit, but Ashiki realizes that Sawasimi is slowly returning to his usual self. With Kamo happy to see Sawasimi is still sharp, Kamo orders Sawasimi to solve the case, giving Sawasimi enough information to figure out who the attacker was. Turning to Ashiki, Sawasimi asks if the attacker had shoved the lady when he was escaping, but when Ashiki says he wasn't, Sawasimi deduces that the attacker was most likely checking his watch hoping to make it past a restricted area, but sadly the path had already closed. Sawasimi concludes that the attacker's malfunctioned watch led them astray and was forced into the clothing store, and that among the suspects there was only one with a malfunctioned watch. Sadly, when Sawasimi asks for the suspect's contact details, the police realize the details are all fake, but Sawasimi knows the attacker will return for his belongings he hid in the store, including the victim's smartphone. As police officers manage to locate the attacker's clothing in the store, Ashiki and Sawasimi rack their brains to locate the victim's phone, but just then Kamo declares that the phone is in plain sight. With Sawasimi catching on to what Kamo is saying, we cut to later that night when the attacker has returned for the phone, reaching out to a mannequin. Just then, several policemen swarm the attacker, prompting Sawasimi to officially arrest the mad chameleon. As Kimyu arrives to help with the arrest, Sawasimi suddenly feels something's off, but proceeds to slightly adjust Kimyu's necktie. Cutting to Ashiki, he informs Kamo that Sawasimi had captured the chameleon, asking what Kamo was doing at Nagoya Station earlier. Kamo reveals that Mofu had recommended a clinic to dig into Kamo's curse, announcing that there may be a way to cure Kamo's curse. As Ashiki celebrates the good news, Kamo ignores Ashiki, glaring off into the distance. Having returned back to his usual routine, Ashiki suddenly gets a call from Kamo, asking if Ashiki would like to help Spitz find his missing family. Seeing as Spitz had been helping them out, Ashiki reasons that they should return the favor, suddenly spotting a frail-looking Spitz. As the two make their way over to Kamo's apartment, they're both surprised to see Kamo has decorated the place, hoping to welcome more clients in the future. Deeming Spitz their first client, the three sit down, but Ashiki wonders why Fitz looks so distracted. Kamo reveals that he's offered to look for Spitz's missing family, but in exchange, Spitz must obtain blue files on the bloody training incident. Kamo does mention how he obtained a copy of the original report files, but some sections from the report seem to be missing, but Ashiki is more curious as to how Kamo got a copy. With Kamo brushing off Ashiki's question, Kamo states that Blue should have the original unedited version, asking Spitz to steal that version, but Ashiki wonders if Kamo can prove his innocence after seeing the files. Kamo reveals that Mofu suspects Kamo's curse may have been caused by medical intervention, leading Kamo to believe that during the 3 hours that he blacked out, something must have occurred, and coincidentally Kamo's copy of the files seemed to have missing details during the 3-hour slot as well. With Kamo reminding Spitz that he'll only help find Spitz's family in exchange for the real files, Ashiki scolds Kamo for being so selfish, reminding Kamo that Spitz is now an integral friend of theirs. Breaking into tears, Spitz thanks Ashiki for the kind words, agreeing to Kamo's conditions, and in exchange, Kamo searches for Spitz's older brother. With an agreement made, Kamo declares that they'll first head over to Waimannashi, leading Spitz to explain his older brother was an ethnologist, someone who studied folk beliefs. Spitz says they're currently heading to the village of Yadamura, a location Spitz's brother would visit often, but 11 years ago out of nowhere he disappeared over the summer whilst Spitz was with him. Out of nowhere, Ashiki spots a white snake, but hearing some roaring sound, Kamo rushes through some bushes, discovering a gorgeous waterfall. Spotting a lady standing up on some rocks, our trio notice a Hokora folk shrine, but at the same time a sudden axe comes flying towards Ashiki, barely missing his head. Having spotted our trio, the lady flees, but out of nowhere several men approach the gang, warning them to be careful, only to disappear with the axe. As Kamo makes note of the men, the gang finally make it to a hill overlooking Yadamura village, but as the three approach a bridge, they spot a crowd of people arguing over some disappearances. Stepping up, Spitz greets the mayor, who recognizes Spitz, apologizing to our trio as the mayor mentions how the construction of a dam requires the entire village to evacuate. Butting in, A construction representative asks that the mayor simply give up his land, but the villagers cry that Yatagami will punish all evil. Ashiki learns that Yatagami is a night snake deity that has been protecting their village for years, suddenly meeting Moroi, who is an ethnologist visiting the village to study the Yatagami. As the villagers continue to hound the construction representative about their god, the mayor tries calming everyone down, suggesting that they let the representative simply survey their village. Hearing the villager ignore the mayor's suggestions, the representative scolds the mayor for not teaching his citizens manners, declaring that they'll start construction tomorrow. With the mayor ordering everyone to return home, Spitz asks what the mayor thinks of the situation, but the mayor admits that it's ultimately their country's final decision. Changing topics, the mayor asks if the gang are staying the night, offering to house them in his home since the representative is staying in the guest hut. As rain begins to pour down on the village, the trio manage to make it to the mayor's home safely, but out of nowhere the lady from before appears. Recognizing her as Mi, Spitz mentions how Mi is the mayor's granddaughter, but as the two act chummy, Kamo observes from the sidelines. That night over dinner, Spitz shows Kamo a picture of his brother, uttering that they were looking into the legend of Yatagami before the incident. When Spitz and his brother went to sleep in the guest hut across the river, Spitz woke up to the realization that his brother had gone missing, and ultimately the police nor the villagers could find him. With Ashiki freaked out by the disappearance, Spitz suddenly asks if he could try Kamo's black sugar syrup concoctions, but Ashiki takes the chance to admire the view of the river from their room, especially now since the rain has stopped. With Ashiki glancing at the guest hut across from them, Ashiki suddenly spots something terrifying, all three spotting a giant snake wrapped around someone. As the trio rush towards the guest hut, Kamo notices there are no footprints outside the muddy guest hut, all three rushing into the hut. Suddenly hearing a sound, the trio split up to search the hut, but failed to find anything. The next morning, police are called upon to discover the corpse of the construction representative at the bottom of the waterfall, with unusual snake-scale markings around his neck. Inspecting the body, Ashiki receives a report that the victim was most likely passed due to falling from the waterfall, but the marks of the victim's neck is still strange. Just then the mayor arrives, warning everyone that this must have been the work of the Yatagami, but Ashiki reminds the mayor that there were no prints around the muddy hut, but the mayor brushes that off as the god's doing. Swiftly hopping over some rocks, Mi asks why the mayor has allowed outsiders into the sacred waterfall, but the mayor states that our trio have come to investigate the murder. Kamo takes the chance to ask why Mi was near the waterfall yesterday, learning that Mi was giving Yatagami an offering in the shrine, something the villagers do often. When Kamo asks if they truly believe that Yatagami exists, Mi suddenly cries that the god does exist, but after thinking for a while, the mayor joins in, asking the other villagers if they think so too. With Ashiki shocked at the appearance of the villagers, Kamo suggests that they leave for now, strolling through the forest as Kamo reasons that a crowd like that will only harm them. As Kamo wonders what's making the villagers so passionate, Moroi suddenly appears from the bushes, asking if the detective trio truly believe that Yatagami killed the representative. Moroi mentions how Yatagami has the ability to make things disappear, stating that 15 years ago a similar construction project was scheduled, but out of nowhere all the machinery disappeared. Moroi sympathizes with Spitz's brother disappearing, revealing that Yatagami's power is strange, having fallen off the mountain, but had survived believing it was Yatagami's protection. Kamo asks what Moroi was doing yesterday, learning that Moroi visited Yatagami's temple yesterday, a place that houses the shed skiing of a massive snake along with various manuscripts. Moroi reveals that the temple was unfortunately closed yesterday, so he was forced to return back to Suzuki's home where Moroi is staying. Now alone, the three go over the events last night, first spotting the body of a large snake, then that there were no prints around the muddy hut and that the hut had barred windows protecting the hut. With Kamo stating that he has an idea of what happened, a policeman arrives guiding the three into the guest hut, leading Ashiki to wonder if the large noise they heard was because of a secret room. Unfortunately, the police reports the roof seems to have not been touched in ages and that the tatami mats on the floor don't seem to be hiding anything. At the same time, Kamo discovers some of his black syrup that he spilled last night rushing over, but seeing as there are no leads, Spitz begins to believe that it truly was a god that took his brother. As Spitz reminisces on his memories with his brother, Spitz suddenly falls back, crying that he spotted a white snake in the river. With Kamo glancing through the windows, Kamo suddenly turns back to a suspicious-looking section of the floor, asking the officer where his spilled bottle of black syrup was when they got there. When the officer says that they haven't moved the spilled syrup except for when they replaced the tatami mats, Kamo declares that he has all the pieces to solve the case. Check out one of our other videos on the screen or in the info card above. Subscribe, like and comment.